Tired of boring logins? What if you could sign in with just your fingerprint? In this video, I will show you how to add Passkey authentication to your Spring Boot app step by step. Let's get started. Let's start from scratch and create a brand new Spring Boot application. Let's head over to start.spring.io. Now, configure our project setup. First, I will select the build tool as Maven, which I prefer. Next, I am choosing Java as the programming language. For the Spring Boot version, always try to use the latest stable release. At this time of this recording, the latest version is Spring Boot 3.4.2. Also, make sure that the selected version supports Spring Security 6.4 because the Passkey support with WebAuthn was introduced in this version. Now, let's update the metadata. For the group name, I will enter my domain name in reverse order, com.learnwithiftekhar. For the artifact name, I will use Passkey auth. Updating the name, Passkey authentication application. Let's also give it a short description. Spring Security Passkey authentication. Now for the package name, this is our root package. For packaging, I'll keep it as jar since that's what we typically use for Spring Boot applications. And for the Java version, the minimum required version is Java 17, but I'll be using Java 21. You can pick any version that is 17 or higher. Next, we need to add the required dependencies. I'll click on the Add Dependencies button. If you are using a Mac, you can also press Command+B, and on Windows, it's Ctrl+B. Now, let's select the necessary dependencies. First, I will add Spring Web since we are building a web application. Next, we need Spring Security, which will handle authentication. We'll also need another dependency that is not available in this dependency list. We need to add that separately in our project. At this time, let's generate the project. Click on the Generate button. The project is generated and downloaded as a zip file. Let's open it in the IDE. Here, I have imported the project into my IDE. I am using IntelliJ IDEA Ultimate Edition. IntelliJ IDEA is my favorite tool for developing Java-based applications. I highly recommend you to give it a try. This Ultimate Edition is a paid version. You can also use their Community Edition, which is completely free, and honestly, that Community Edition is more than enough for most of the developers. But this paid Ultimate version obviously provides some cool and more advanced feature that helps you develop your application quickly and easily. If you want to give it a try, I have a link in the description below. By using that coupon, you will get a 3-month subscription of Ultimate Edition completely free. Back to the code. Here, let's run the project. Our project is started at localhost on port 8080. It has also generated a password to log in into the application. Let's check it in the browser. Localhost 8080. Here we have this login page. Nothing fancy here, just a plain login page that contains a field for username and password. Here, let's provide the username. The default username is the user, and the password, let's copy the password from the console. Here is our generated password. Copy it and paste it in the password field. Login. Here we have this white level error. Check the status code. It is 404. Check the URL. We successfully logged in, but seeing this error page because we have not defined any endpoint to handle this request. We'll fix it in a moment. Let's log out for the time being. Log out. Now we have this boring default login page. Beside the usual input field for username and password, I want to enhance this experience by adding an option to users to log in using Passkey. This will make authentication more seamless, giving users an additional secure way to access their accounts. Back to the IDE. Here, I am going to configure the Spring Security to provide the Passkey support. Inside the root package, let's create another package. Name config. Inside the config, create a new Java class, security config. To make Spring Boot identify this as a configuration, we need to add annotation at configuration. We also need another annotation enable web security to make Spring aware that it is our security configuration class. Here, at the very beginning, I am going to define our user for our application. I do not want to use the auto-generated password. For defining a user, we need a bean of type user details service. Inside this method, we will define our user. For simplicity, I am going to use the in-memory authentication manager, which will store the user information in memory. This is just for demonstration purpose. In a real-world application, you typically store user data in the database and authenticate against that data. If you are interested in learning how to set up authentication with database, check out my other video where I have covered that in detail. For users, Spring Security requires a user details object. Name this user. Here, we will provide the credentials of the user. User, make sure you import it from Spring Security core user details with username iftekhar and password, add a role user and build. Finally, return new instance of in-memory user details manager and provide the user as the constructor parameter. So our user is ready. But there's one more thing we need to take care of. Spring Security requires a password encoder to store password securely. Right now, I'm providing a plain text password, and that won't work because Spring Security enforces password encoding by default. To fix this, we'll define another bean, this time for the password encoder. This method will return a password encoder, and for this example, I'll use bcrypt password encoder, which is strong hashing algorithm widely used for securely storing password. Now, in this password field, I need to encode the password before storing it. To do that, I'll use password encoder we just defined, then call the encode method on the password encoder and provide the password. With that, our user is ready. Now, I'm going to configure the default behavior of Spring Security to enable Passkey. Before that, we need another dependency named WebAuthn 4j. Go to the Maven repository site, Google for it. This is the repository library. Search for WebAuthn 4j. This is the library we need, WebAuthn 4j core. Click on this. Let's use the latest version. In this window, make sure this Maven tab is selected. Now, copy this dependency definition from here. Back to the IDE. Open the pom.xml. Here, add the dependency. Paste. Now, we need to refresh the Maven project. We are now ready to do Passkey authentication. Back to security config. Here, for changing the Spring Security default configuration, we will use a new bean. This will return the security filter chain. Give it the same name, security filter chain. It accepts HTTP security. Now, inside this method, we'll define our configuration. HTTP, then authorize HTTP request. I want all of the requests must be authenticated. Providing lambda expression, req arrow function, req dot any request authenticated. Then form login. For this, let's go with default. After that, I will define WebAuthn. Inside this, we need to configure it. WebAuthn arrow WebAuthn. Here, need to provide an RP name. We can give it an arbitrary name, Spring Security Relying Party. Then we need the RP ID. Provide an ID for the relying party. It is localhost for me. Finally, need to provide the allowed origin. Here, I am running this application in my localhost with port 8080. I want to allow this URL. In the real world, make sure you use your real domain name, and also it needs to be HTTPS. And finally, build and return the HTTP. With this, let's run the project. Our project is running. Let's check in the browser. This was our login page. Refresh. Here you can see a new button for Passkey authentication added. When you click on this Passkey, a pop-up window appears. This window asks how you want to set up your Passkey. It gives options like using a phone, tablet, or security key. However, I'm not going to use any of those. Instead, I'll save the Passkey on my Mac and use my fingerprint to log in. First, I need to register for WebAuthn. This will allow me to securely store my passkey and use my fingerprint for login. Let's log in using our username and password. Here, it shows this white label error. That is because we have not set up anything to process this URL endpoint. Let's fix it fast. Inside the root package, I am going to create a new package, controller. Inside the controller package, a new Java class, name it dashboard controller. Here, I am going to use REST controller and get endpoint to handle the root URL. Return string, name it index, and finally return hello world. Now start the project again. Sign in using username and password. Sign in. Here is our hello world response from our controller. Now it's time to register a new credential. For that, we need to go to WebAuthn/register. Here we have this WebAuthn registration form. Give it a name. Add register. Provide my touch ID. Done. It's now registered. Now let's log out. Log out. This time try to sign in with Passkey. Now it opens this prompt to provide my touch ID, giving my fingerprint. Done. We are now successfully signed in. And that's it. Now you have Passkey authentication in your Spring Boot app. Want to dive deeper into Spring security? Check out my other videos where I cover database authentication, JWT, and more. See you there.